motion. And we've added D, endorse the submission of the Mangere Otahu and Otara Papatoe local boards around the criteria for District Licensing Committee selection. I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
No. I declare that carried. Thank you. We now move to item 12. Thank you, the officers. Thank you very much. Thank you. 12.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is what we're here today to just go through the submission on the Freshwater Reforms document, the consultation document that came out through MFE recently. And a little bit of a background on this, it's following on from the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. It's the process we're going through at a national level, looking at freshwater reform, and as is another step in the process. We still have lots of involvement within the Land and Water Forum and other areas. For this particular document, I'm going to hand across to my colleague here, Andrew Miller, and he'll run through a presentation on what this document is about. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg and Chair. I'll just briefly run through what the government's proposed reforms are. They're part of a package that they foreshadowed several years ago in their ongoing reforms. Some of them relate to changes to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. Others would be introduction of regulations or guidance and or changes to the RMA. Can we progress to the next slide? Yep, I got that, okay. Okay, so number one is the proposed changes to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. There's an appendix that gives exemptions for significant infrastructure. So it would be up to the government to consider applications for those exemptions, and they're asking what evidence would need to be provided in those types of applications. The MCI is the Macro Invertebrate Community Index. They're proposing there that it be a mandatory requirement to use the MCI, which is a measure of ecological health of the water body. Intermittently closing and opening lakes and lagoons. At the moment, there's a question of whether these predominantly large lagoons in some of the parts of the South Island are covered by marine or freshwater rules. So here it's proposed that the opening and closing lakes and lagoons be treated as freshwater bodies. In the MPS at the moment, there's a requirement to maintain or improve overall water quality within the region, and there's been a bit of discussion about what that actually means, how it would be, how you would do that. And so the proposal here is that it be, rather than within the region, it be maintain or improve overall water quality within a freshwater management unit, which would be basically probably a much smaller catchment-based area. Stock exclusion regulation, so there's a proposal there to introduce a national regulation that related to the exclusion of stock from freshwater bodies to improve water quality outcomes. There's a range of proposals that relate to economic use of fresh water in relation to providing guidance and the like. Fourthly, we write some interest. There's a suite of proposals that relate to that. Tamana OTY is a concept that was introduced to the MPSFM in the 2014 amendment to the MPSFM, and here a proposal is just to provide more context about the meaning of Tamana OTY. The second is a proposal for Rhi Agreements, EV agreements with councils on a catchment sort of area basis. Integration of water conservation orders with planning processes. Water conservation orders are a tool that exists in the Act whereby a group can ask the government to establish rules in relation to a particular water body that's of national significance. We don't have any in Auckland. There are about 14 or so nationally since this tool was introduced. The last point there on iwi rights is funding for marae infrastructure. The government proposing to provide some funding for improving infrastructure on marae and papakainga, which are housing developments. I just missed one there. Yeah, and changes to freshwater funding. So there's a fund for retiring farmland around to improve water quality, and there's some proposals to make changes to that. So the general direction of the submission is to support the proposals for the significant infrastructure. Some of the criteria that we propose is to recognise the community health and wellbeing benefits of those types of infrastructure. We support including the MCI as a mandatory requirement for monitoring ecological health, but as a guideline value rather than an attribute that has a limit on it. That would provide, I guess, consistency in terms of some of the attributes that we have in the NOF, the National Objectives Framework, measure specific water quality parameters, but they don't give a measure of the ecological health of the water body as a whole. Supporting the overall improvement of water quality within an FMU rather than a region for practicality reasons. Supporting the stock exclusion proposal for national regulations, provided that we have the ability to pursue the regional rules that are more specific to our region. Recognising urban issues and water-sensitive urban design in terms of guidance and improving efficiency. And we're proposing that we support relationship-based EV agreements rather than the legislative requirements of the Rhi Agreements, which is consistent with the approach that was promoted for the council submission on the resource management legislation bill that was recently before council for submissions to the government. Supporting funding for improvements in water infrastructure for marae and papakainga. There are a number of marae in the Auckland region that are outside the municipal supply area, and some of those marae would benefit from improving their water infrastructure. And lastly, regarding the funding, recognising improvements in urban freshwater quality rather than just retiring farmland. Thanks.
Question. Councillor Cashmore, and I see the Rural Advisory Panel has got some views here. So, Councillor.
Mr. Chairman, it's not so much of a question. I've got some thoughts I'd like to share, if that's appropriate. So everyone wants better water qualities, no question about that, and I support this submission. And there's a few alterations from what's in the printed document before you, but this is a step on a journey, and one of the challenges we have is it's probably going to be quite a long journey and a very, very expensive journey. Water quality is not just a rural issue, it's also a massive urban issue. We do not have one urban water body that meets the baseline tests in this city. So the cost of mitigating that and fixing the stormwater is massive, in the billions. And so using the MCI indexes, which it's a good starting point, and the officers talked about it as it's an indicator. It's not a hard line. If you think about stormwater in your areas where it flows from an urban environment along a roadside or a rural roadside, then it flows through an actual built-up area, then it goes into a market gardening area or an orchard. How do you measure who supplies what contaminants in and out? It's very complex and probably virtually impossible. And one would have to question the work that's been done, funded by central government, about MCI indexes and where it's level. But that's a question we have to put to the government, perhaps. And when we look at the exemptions and timelines, well, 95 to 96% of intensively farmed livestock in the Auckland region are already exempted and are already from waterways. They are excluded now. So we're getting there pretty quickly. Where we have some complications and where that was recognised in the proposed Auckland Unitary Plan work that the Rural Advisory Panel did last term was about how we actually do the steeper and harder country. And best management practices was the results that we came out with that. And we had a roundtable discussion with all the NGOs, Forest and Bird, Fish and Game, DOC. There was 8 different organisations that came along. And what I thought would be a very, very set of contentious discussions was all over in 45 minutes. So they said, we actually think your proposal that you're putting in through the Unitary Plan, Auckland Council, is a good one. So I think we need to be a real emphasis that we are consistent with our Unitary Plan submissions and our proposals going forward. But the flexibility is built in to this submission to reinforce that. The other issue is the economic use and the good practice not only applies to rural but also applies to urban. And that's where you talk with Craig McElroy, and the challenges around stormwater are not insubstantial at all. Whether it's new greenfields or old legacy town centres and suburbs. It is massive work, massively expensive. And perhaps the last comment I'll make, Mr Chairman, is to do with iwi rights under this legislation, under the RMA. It's going to be politically contentious. Most of you would have already seen some of the comment floating around about this. And I strongly support this council's approach, which is about having agreements with iwi, so a combined understanding of where we're headed and where we want to go and how we're going to get there. The level of the iwi involvement should be agreed and consistent and practical within timelines. And it should be in terms of consultation and not a predeterminant for a consent, granting or not. And those levels of iwi involvement should be resourced by central government, and there should be national standards about how they're implemented if we're going to make this thing work. So, in conclusion, Mr Chairman, the staff have done a good job of the submission. I was with them at the Minister's presentation at Ellerslie Racecourse 2 weeks ago. It's a very complex issue, and anyone simplifying it down to think it's purely about chasing a few dairy cows out of a creek is not doing this work justice. There is a lot to it. It's going to take a lot of time. And as the staff have indicated, we need the flexibility and the pragmatism to deliver what is the best results and the most affordable results for this city and this region. Thanks, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Casey, did you wish to...
Yeah, it was just, I read the submission. There was just one thing I wanted to suggest, that we're in a unique case in Auckland because we've got polluted streams, but they're going to get better through the Central Interceptor. But the Central Interceptor message is buried in the middle of this under Action 6, and I wondered if we should... I know they always ask us questions and we respond, but at the beginning we should say, here's the state of play, we've got this number of waterways, we've got huge pollution, we've got huge issues, and we've got the Central Interceptor coming. My next point is that there's Central Interceptor creep here again. I watch that end date with great interest every time I see a document, and my latest is 2023 with work starting in 2017. Yours is 2018 and finishing in 2024. Where did you get that from?
So, yeah, thank you, Councillor Casey, through you, Chair. I used the information that we had in the previous submission to the MPSFM reforms, which Watercare had provided me with, and through this formulating the submission, I fed that information back to Watercare, and they advised me that the dates had changed. I learnt that through them when I gave them a draft submission they asked me to alter the date, so I reflected what they told me based on the information they gave me.
Thank you.